Hey everybody. I haven't done a DNRS update in a while, so I was just doing yoga and felt like I needed to stop and share an update with you all, something that happened yesterday. So if I'm a little bit sweaty, sorry. You can't smell me anyway, so I don't think you care. But anyway, anyway, so if you've been following me, or even if you haven't been, you know that I am doing DNRS, the Dynamic Neural Retraining System for food sensitivities. I have multiple food sensitivities that result in so many different symptoms. And I've been doing DNRS for 11 months now, very seriously. I did it for a while before that, but not very seriously. Um, I took about a month off around 8 months in. It wasn't intentional, I just sort of did. And then I decided I needed to get back to it. So I'm 11 months in, and I'm really focusing right now on the food sensitivities. For a long time, I was just doing the rounds and not really worrying about the food stuff, because every time I tried adding foods in or doing incremental training, I would just have such bad reactions and it just felt awful. And so I just took the focus off of the food. But I have been focusing a lot more on food. I'm really tired of, eating something and then having a horrible emotional reaction or horrible physical reactions. And I just decided it's time to deal with this. And something I've decided to do in the last week or so is just to see the reactions and just know, if you're doing DNRS, that I'm also a hypnotherapist, and I kind of take a lot of what I've learned over the years and bring it into my practice. So I don't follow the DNRS way of just, if something comes up, you just kind of try to ignore it and retrain your brain into a more positive space. I don't think that's wrong, but it's just not what I think is going to work for me. So I decided that what I was going to do is just take all of these reactions as just an opportunity to see what's still stuck inside of me, to just take the emotional reaction and say, oh, okay, I still have all of this depression inside of me. I still have all of this anxiety inside of me. I still have all of this anger inside of me. Or to take the physical reactions and say, okay, there's some sort of something coming up here. Maybe I don't know what it represents, but this is still inside of me. So to take the reaction, and instead of getting upset that it's happening, just be like, yes, here's an opportunity to deal with this. Okay, let's go. And I do have 10 years of experience as a hypnotherapist learning how to deal with emotions. So I'm not afraid of them when they come up anymore. And I think for a very long time, I was afraid of my emotions. So I was afraid of my depression. I was afraid of my anxiety. And so I wanted to avoid anything that made it happen, including food. So that's kind of where I am right now, just deciding I'm not going to be afraid of these things anymore. I'm just going to welcome them, deal with them, release them, and then move on. So one of the biggest fears for me and biggest confusions for me around this process has been seeing that a lot of people who do DNRS or other brain retraining go back to eating gluten. And I have been very strictly gluten-free for 14 years now. I never expected when I first went gluten-free that it would be 14 years of it, but I found that it did help me with my depression. And like I said, I was very afraid of that depression. It was very intense. So, so I've seen other people going back to eating gluten and feeling great, and, just being very confused. Like, should I eat gluten? Should I not eat gluten? Is this okay for me? Is it not? Wanting to go into that analysis paralysis, really, of just trying to figure it out, trying to figure out the puzzle. And that's actually one of the things that I've been learning to let go of through this process, is not having to figure everything out. So basically what I've decided, because one of my big goals is just to have more freedom in my life. I felt like, being sensitive to so many foods, having to take my food everywhere I went, having to plans so much, not being able to go out to restaurants, all of these things really just kept me in this little box. And I wanted freedom. So I decided, okay, I kind of talked with, the different parts of myself, the fearful part, or in DNRS, we would say the limbic system. Um, but the fearful part of myself that's like, no, stay away from gluten. And then the other part that's like, but I want food freedom. I want to be able to just go anywhere and do anything and eat what I want. And we kind of came up with an agreement that I could experiment, with eating it and see what happens, and that it would be okay for me to make a mistake, because that's kind of another thing in my personality that I've been letting go of, is this idea that I can't make mistakes. So I gave myself the freedom to experiment with gluten and know that it could be a mistake, that maybe it's not what I should be eating, maybe it's not what's healthiest for my body, and I might realize later on, no, I need to go back to being very strictly gluten-free. Or maybe I need to go back to being gluten-free but not so strict. Who knows? But so in this experimenting, which has been very scary for me, it brings up a lot of feelings of shame. If I do eat gluten, I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing something horrible to myself. And if you've been in this, in this food sensitivity world, you know that like it is scary. It is scary eating something that makes you feel not great, but also all of the food blogs and all of the YouTube channels and doctors and naturopaths, and there's so many people who will just tell you how gluten is gonna kill you. And so I have this big fear. And so I decided yesterday, I ate an English muffin because we had English muffins and nobody else in my family seems to eat them. I bought them thinking, oh, people will like these. And then they're just sitting in the fridge. And I love English muffins. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to eat an English muffin. I was doing my rounds, my DNRS rounds, and I thought, I need a snack. Let's just go eat this. And I ate it, and it was delicious. It wasn't the best thing in the world. I think that's one thing I've noticed when I've brought back foods that I had avoided for a long time, is they're not as good as I remember them being, except for cheese, which is as good as I remember it being, especially Havarti with dill, which is my favorite cheese. But anyway, so I ate it, and then I went back to my rounds. Actually, no, that's not what I did. What I did is I went and I sat down, and I just basically said, okay, if there's something that needs to come up, if there's something that, is still inside of me that gets triggered when I eat gluten, maybe the gluten reminds me of something, I just invite it. And, I kind of sat there and I was breathing and kind of trying to release things and, finally acknowledging, I think what was coming up was the fear. And so I finally just acknowledged myself, okay, I'm afraid. And, and it's still there. What came up was, I'm afraid to die. What came up was my grandpa had a heart attack and died when I was 18. And, I've kind of gone through this cycle since then of getting into binge eating as my way of dealing with the feelings. And then getting into orthorexia as another way of trying to control life, trying to control, if I eat perfectly, then I won't ever die early. And, I have 2 kids, so that fear is just there. There's this feeling of like, there's this feeling of I don't want to die early and do that to them. And it's really interesting because I don't know if you follow at all celebrity culture and gossip. I do. I find it fascinating on just a very, cultural level. And there's this whole thing with Gwyneth Paltrow. talking about what she eats in a day, and it's, paleo and bone broth and intermittent fasting, and everyone's saying, oh, it's promoting disordered eating. And I see that, and I also see myself in that, and years of trying to eat perfectly. And I read what she said about it, and she said, when my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and I think she was in her 30s at the time, I started looking into food and eating differently and trying to figure out how can I really take care of my health better. And, her father did pass away. And so I was just watching that or reading that and thinking, she's kind of doing the same thing. Like, she's trying to control everything in her life so that she doesn't die like her dad did. She doesn't leave her kids like he did. And so that's what came up in that moment. And I just cried and I let it out. I felt much better afterwards, actually, because I was immediately having a reaction. And so the reaction kind of subsided as I cried and let it all out. But then, now there's something more to this. So later in the day, I was doing yoga again. And I started having, I think it's called Raynaud's. Raynaud's like symptoms, where my toes, if I eat something my body doesn't like, my toes will get like white, like the blood stops going to my toes, and they get very cold. It's uncomfortable. And so that was happening. I was doing yoga and noticing like, oh, all of my toes are white. Usually it's just one or two. So I was like, oh, my body is not liking this gluten. And I'm watching it and I'm doing yoga and I'm trying to ignore it. And then finally I'm just doing the yoga this whole time, but I'm having this conversation with myself and I'm saying, I'm never gonna know, like really, really know whether gluten is the right thing for me to eat or not, whether I should be moving towards food freedom or moving back towards being gluten-free. I'm never going to know. It's not something I can unless I have celiac, I can't say, yes, absolutely, because I have so much fear of it. And I just talked about that extreme fear around it. So of course my body is going to react if I eat something that I'm so afraid of. And so I had this thought and realized, in order for me to really know whether this is right for me or not, I need to be able to let go of the fear. And the only way for me to let go of the fear is to just surrender it to God. And God for me is, a non-religious, non-denominational, just, that feeling of surrender and spiritual divinity. I don't even know what I'm saying right now, but a lot of people don't like the word God, but that's just the word that resonates for me. Michael A. Singer, who wrote The Untethered Soul, which was a huge book for me in realizing I needed to get out of this box I'd put myself in. He calls it just surrendering to life, realizing that you have no control over life, and so you just have to surrender to it. And so for me, I just use the word God. Like, I have no control over any of this. I have no understanding of, I can't reason this out, because I can find 10 doctors who will tell me I should be eating gluten because it's part of a healthy diet, and I can find 10 doctors who would tell me I shouldn't be. I can find proof on either side. So I have no control here, and I just need to surrender it over to God. And again, I'm still doing yoga. My feet are white. My toes are white. And I'm thinking, okay, when I'm done with yoga, I'm going to, just breathe and surrender. And then I realized I don't need to wait until I'm done. I can do it right now. So in that moment, as I was going through the movements, I just said, God, I'm giving this over to you. I can't figure this out. I have no control over this. I'm just letting you have the fear. And I just did this breathing that I do with a lot of my clients, not in a religious way at all, but just teaching them how to breathe and soften their body and let things go. And so I just did that, gave it over to God, continued on with my yoga. And in the next moment, not in the next moment, in like the next minute, I noticed that my toes were no longer cold, they were tingling and kind of burning, which is for me the next thing that happens when they start to warm up again, when the blood starts to flow again. And it doesn't feel bad. It's just like, oh, they're kind of warm and tingly. And, I look down and my toes are, turning color again. The color's flowing back in. And it was like as soon as I just surrendered and breathed and just was like, I'm not in control of this. I let it go. I let the fear go. My feet went back to normal. And I've never experienced anything quite so. I have experienced, being able to breathe and notice that the symptoms go away, but not something that I could physically see. This was the first time something happened like that where I could physically see the change. So I was just like, whoa, okay. All right. That's a sign right there. And throughout the rest of the night, my body continued to do little things. I'd have a pain here, and I would just be like, okay, I'm surrendering that. And it'd go away, and then I'd have a pain over here. Surrender it. It would go away. The pains just kept moving, and I kept surrendering them, and they kept moving. And at some point, I had to stop because I was like, I gotta just focus on what I'm doing. I'm making dinner. And this morning, I had some symptoms this morning, which, brought that fear back up of like, I shouldn't be eating gluten. I shouldn't be doing this. But also a lot less symptoms than I would have expected to have. And, that's where I am right now. That's where I am with that. That's where I am with the other foods that I'm trying to work on. I have other foods like this homemade paleo granola I made. Excuse me, that, it's supposed to be super healthy for me, but my body reacts to that like worse than anything I've been eating lately. So who knows? But I wanted to share that because I think it's so important for you, if you're on this journey as well, to know that there are so many factors that go into having food sensitivities, and fear is a big one of them. And if you can find a way for yourself, something that works for you, to release that fear, to surrender that, so you can see what's real when the fear isn't there, whether that's surrendering it to God or surrendering it to life, or I don't know what else, but whatever works for you, whatever language works for you, just learning to like breathe, soften your body, and just surrender it. It will help you so much to see, what's real and what's not when the fear isn't there. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I hope it was helpful for you in some way. If it resonated, just leave a comment. Let me know. I love to know who's watching and what you're getting out of this. And if you're on this journey too, I'd love to hear. Okay, bye.